Youth Biolab Jeunesse.
Hi, I'm Steve.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Angelica.
We're from the Youth Biolab at the Albertson Research Center at St. Boniface Hospital. We all know the job of the hospital is to treat patients. Here at the Research Center, our job is to study disease. If we ever want to cure a disease, we have to understand it first.
When you think of scientists studying disease, you probably think first of things like cancer or more recently, COVID-19. We don't study either of those here. But there are research scientists over at the National Microbiology Lab who are studying infectious diseases like the flu or COVID-19 or Ebola, where they have special equipment that can protect them from the germs that they're working with. There are also groups of cancer scientists working over at Cancer Care Manitoba in Health Sciences Centre, and it's their job to study cancer. We like to keep scientists together so that they can work as a team to come up with cures or treatments for these diseases that we see.
At the Albertson Research Center, we have three big interests. On our fourth floor, we have the Division of Neurodegenerative Disorders. This is where we study diseases that affect the brain and nervous system, just like Alzheimer's disease and type 2 diabetes nerve damage. On our third floor, we have the Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences. This is where we study diseases that affect the heart and cardiovascular system. On our second floor, we have the Canadian Centre for Agri-Food Research in Health and Medicine, and this is where we study food. They research foods that are really good for us, some that might be bad for us, and some that might be so good that they act like medicine.
Our lab, the Youth Biolab, was created so that we can share some of the things that we do here in the Research Center with you. And hopefully we can help you learn a little bit more about how medical science works and understand a little bit more of the science of your own health. Okay, so today we're going to explore a little bit about heart disease, like our scientists at our Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences study every day here at the Research Center. When we talk about heart disease, this is an enormous problem. Heart disease is responsible for 1 out of 3 deaths in Canada. Now, when we say heart disease, we're talking about anything that can affect the heart or how blood flows around your body. You've probably heard of a lot of these things in your daily life. You've probably heard of high blood pressure. That's part of heart disease. You might have heard of heart failure. That's part of heart disease. You might have heard of heart attacks. That's the biggest part of heart disease. We probably are all familiar with something or someone in our life that might have had heart problems, and that could be any one of those things. So when we talk about the heart, it's important to understand what it really does. I think we all know that the heart pumps blood around your body. The way it does that is it kind of works like 2 fists. So if you can imagine one fist here and another fist here, and we glue them together, that's your heart. Even though your heart, we normally say, is the size of 1 fist, the way it works is like these 2 fists glued together. And what they do all day long is squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And they pump that blood through your body through a series of tubes that we call arteries and veins. So arteries would take blood away from your heart, and veins bring blood back into your heart. So you can imagine your heart pumping away, and these arteries are taking blood up to your brain, and over to your muscles, and down to your kidneys. And we need that blood to keep flowing all day, every day, to keep the rest of your body healthy. When heart disease happens, that could happen anywhere in this system. It could happen with the pump itself, or it could happen somewhere in these tubes. Let's have a look and see how this works. So let's picture this another way. You might have done this in the tub or at the beach. If you take a fist and put it in the water, we know we can create pressure by squeezing that water. And what happens? The water will squirt out. Now, this is really what your heart is doing every single beat in your body. Those 2 fists working and working and working together to keep that blood moving. They're hooked up, like we said, to a series of tubes, those arteries and veins. And it's your heart's job to make sure that blood continues going through those arteries. So we can imagine if there's damage to the pump or if there's damage to the arteries, that blood is not going to get where it needs to go. We often see in people what we call atherosclerotic plaques, and these are little blobs of fat that can build up over time in these arteries. Even in kids as young as 9, we can measure and see some of these tiny little blobs starting to form. But if you exercise, if you eat healthy, and if you don't smoke, that really helps keep all these parts of the puzzle together. And arteries can stay healthier, the heart muscle can stay healthier, and the body can stay healthier. So to see how this really works, when our scientists study hearts, we aren't always working with models like this. Sometimes we need to see the real thing. So what we'd like to walk you through today is the dissection of a pig heart. So we can really see what these arteries look like and what that muscle looks like and how things go wrong in heart disease. So before we get to the real heart, let's just quickly think about what the heart does and how it works. You might have seen a heart diagram like this, maybe in class at school. And it kind of points out the main parts of the heart. You might have heard of the right atrium or the ventricles. Those are the chambers of our heart. And it points out some of the big arteries and veins that branch out of the heart itself. Let's quickly review how that blood flows through our heart. So when you picture your heart, you can picture it just like this. So there's your heart. When we talk about the heart, like we mentioned before, we separate it into those two sides, those two fists. I'll draw a line through the middle. Here's our left side, and here's our right side. Now you might notice looking at this that I've put the right side of the heart on my left-hand side. And why is that? We're looking at a front view. So if you look at me, where's the right side of my heart? It's over here on my right side, your left. And my left side of my heart is on your right. Okay? Same as my right hand is over here and my right ear is over here. My right atrium is over here and my right ventricle is over here. The right side functions as one pump and the left side functions as another. They both receive blood from somewhere and pump it out somewhere else. So they receive blood from somewhere, pump it out somewhere else. Right side receives blood that's been through the body. It comes in through your superior vena cava and into the right side. And the right side will eventually pump it out to the lungs. After that blood has traveled to the lungs and soaked up some new oxygen and dropped off carbon dioxide, it'll return to the left side. So blood comes in from the lungs to the left side and will eventually pump back out to the body to deliver that oxygen to all of your tissues. We separate each side into two chambers. The top chamber on each side is kind of a meeting place, and that's called your atrium. So you have a left atrium where the blood meets up, and you have a right atrium where the blood will meet up on the right side. The atria, left and right atrium, pump down into the next chamber, which is called the ventricles. These are those big, powerful fists that can move that blood out where it needs to go. So you have a left ventricle, and you have a right ventricle. Blood meets in the atrium, down to the ventricles, out to the lungs. So right side is always going body to lungs, left side is always going lungs to body. When we get the real heart out in front of us, what we're going to do is we're going to follow that flow of the blood through the heart. So we'll head through the right side, into the right atrium, down to the right ventricle, and then out to the lungs. Then we'll move in from the lungs to the left atrium, down into the left ventricle, and then out your big aorta to get to your body. So what we're going to work with today is a heart that comes from a pig. These are hearts that are byproducts of meat processing. So when they take the ham and ribs and all the other things from the animal, the hearts are the leftover bits and pieces. So we pick these up from maple leaf pork. They're really, really good for us to study because a pig's heart really has all the same parts as our heart. They're a very, very good model of a human heart. When we work with something like this is basically like raw meat, so it could carry germs on it. So there's a few precautions I'm going to want to take. I'm going to want to glove up for most of this, and I'm going to make sure I wash my hands after. As long as we do things over a tray and over a absorbent pad here, we should be just fine. The number one rule when we work with something like this is that this comes from a living thing, so it needs to be treated with respect at all times. So what does that mean? It means these things are really here for us to learn from and not to play with. So as I walk you through, we'll be able to do most of this with a pair of scissors and some forceps to show you everything I need to do. We'll do it calmly, we'll do it respectfully, but we should be able to point out where things can actually go wrong in the heart when we talk about heart disease. So here we have our pig's heart. about the same size as our heart. I'm a pretty tall guy. There's the size of my fist, which would be about the size of my heart. And if you look closely, you can see that's probably about the same size as what I would have in my chest. Okay? So the first thing we want to do is just get ourselves oriented and figure out what we're actually looking at. The top, the bottom, the front, the back, the right, and the left. When you look at the heart, if you compare it to a heart diagram, there's a few things we can look for. To tell front from back, I always look for where the big veins enter. If you look at a heart diagram, the big veins enter through the back of the heart. So here I can't see any big veins, but if I look towards the other side, I notice two big arteries coming out the top, and I notice two big veins entering in the back. The big difference, the way we can tell, arteries are quite thick and whitish. These two big tubes here are big arteries, whereas veins are thinner and have more of a purple color. I can just grab a little bit of that vein. There's not too much left, but we can see a little bit of that vein right there. To tell which vein is which and which artery is which, we need to identify which side of the heart is which. So if you're looking at, if we've determined that this is the front and this is the back, when we're looking at the front of the heart, we have to determine left and right side. So remember, you're picturing this heart in the animal or inside me, which means this would be my right side, this would be my left side. So that's the right side of the heart, the left side of the heart. Okay? Next thing we need to identify is a few more of the structures of the heart. We talked a little bit about the atrium and the ventricles of the heart. The atria are the chambers where the blood first meets up, and the ventricles are the chambers that will actually fill with blood to squeeze and push that blood out through the big arteries. When you look at a typical heart diagram, it kind of looks like one big lump of muscle. But when you look at a real heart, it's quite easy to find where the atria actually are. They actually look like little wings or little ears that sit on top of the heart. So there's our two little atria, a right atrium and a left atrium, that will then pump blood down into those ventricles, which make up this main part of the heart below. So like I said, in our video, what we're going to try and do is follow that flow of the blood through the heart. We're going to start in the right side and find our way into that right atrium, down to the right ventricle, and out through the big artery, which from the right side is the pulmonary artery. So we're going to move to the left side, left atrium, down into the left ventricle, and out through the big aorta. That's the big artery right in the top of the heart. So let's get started. So let's find that right atrium again. Again, here's our right side. There's that little ear that makes up the right atrium. What we want to do first is find our way into that right atrium. When blood is coming back from the body, so this is blood that's been up to your head, it's been down to your legs, it's been through all your organs, it's going to return and meet up in that right atrium. And the way it gets there is through your veins, and will eventually end up in the two big veins that enter the right atrium, your superior vena cava and your inferior vena cava. Like we said before, the veins enter the back of the heart. So if I turn towards the back, we need to find how that blood enters in there, and that should be our vena cava. So if I loosen things up a little bit, I notice a hole here, and I can move my finger in there, and now I'm inside the right atrium. So right now I'm in my superior vena cava. This would all be blood coming back from the top of the body, and I can look down here and find my inferior vena cava. That would be blood coming back from the bottom of the body. Where they all meet up though is right in that little right atrium. Just a little meeting place. So what I'm going to do is take my scissors, and we're going to open up that right atrium. Just the same way my finger went in, my scissors are going to enter that atrium. You'll notice I used the blunt end of the scissors so I'm not damaging anything on the inside of that as we go. So a couple little snips across the top surface of that atrium, and we should be able to open it up and have a look inside. So this little pocket, when we open it up, you'll notice the muscle structure on the inside looks very different than it does on the outside. The muscle's set up in this way, so when the right atrium contracts, it can contract along all these different lines, and it'll create almost a ringing motion of that muscle. If you looked at an arm muscle, our muscles would be all straight fibers, because an arm muscle contracts more like an accordion. this part of the heart is going to squeeze to get every last little drop of blood down into that ventricle so it can be pumped out to the lungs. So let's follow that blood. I can follow with my finger first. This is like going down into that fist. So I can follow down here. And now I'm inside the right ventricle. So let's follow that blood with our scissors. From here, I'm going to continue down the front of the heart and maintain that cut until I reach the bottom of the chamber. The bottom of that chamber lies right underneath this band of arteries that runs across the front of the heart. So the septum, that's the wall that divides the right side and left side, septum runs right underneath this line, which are your coronary arteries. We'll get to them in a little bit. Let me continue cutting down the front surface of the right ventricle, and we can have a look inside. As we open this up, there's a few things and a few structures we might notice. We might notice some clotted blood inside these chambers. When blood cools down, when blood pools in places, it's going to blob up like that. Same as if you have a cut. When it's exposed to the air, when it's pooling and cooling, it's going to blob up and form little clots. I'm going to make a little snip here. We'll come back to that structure in a second. So now we've opened up that right ventricle. It's like opening up that fist like that. We notice that the wall of the ventricle is quite a bit thicker than the wall of the atrium. But remember, the atrium is only pumping from here down to here, whereas the ventricle has to squeeze and force that blood out of the heart to get somewhere else. In this case, we're forcing it out to get to the lungs. We can look around and maybe find a few other structures. In class, you might have heard of heart valves. And heart valves are little flaps in the heart that sort of work like little doors. They open to let blood out, and they'll slam shut so blood can't return, so it can't come backwards. And we've got 4 little sets of valves as we move through the heart. Here we should be able to see one of those valves. This is your tricuspid valve, and it really just looks like little flaps. So there's one cusp of our valve. Here's another cusp of our valve. And the third one we've had to cut through as we made our cut, but there's 3 little flaps. And those 3 little flaps of the valve will open to let blood flow into that ventricle, and they'll slam shut so that blood will not come back. Instead, the only way it can go is up and around this corner until we come out our pulmonary artery. So this would be blood now that's heading off to the lungs. That's its next destination. So let's follow it out that way. As we follow it, I'm cutting through muscle, but eventually I'm going to reach this artery, your pulmonary artery, and we'll cut out through there as well. In the pulmonary artery, we're going to reveal another valve. It looks a little bit different. This is one of your semilunar valves. Semilunar meaning just half moons. If you look closely, you might be able to see there's little half moon shapes here, here, and there's another one we've cut through. And when we look even closer, we realize that they're little flaps as well. So blood can squirt out, but if it tries to come backwards, it'll get caught in those little flaps and can't go back into the heart. So every step of the way, there's a little set of valve doors that'll open and close to make sure that blood is flowing in the proper direction. So we finished with the right side, atrium, ventricle, pulmonary artery. That blood all heads off to the lungs where it can soak up some fresh oxygen. Now it's the left side's job to take that oxygenated blood and move it back out to the body. So when the blood returns from the lungs, it's going to meet up in our left atrium. This time it's traveling back through our pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins, just like the vena cava, it's a vein also, they enter the back of the heart. One will come in from the right lung, one will come in from the left lung, and they'll both meet up in our left atrium. Okay? So this is nice, fresh, oxygenated blood. Filled left atrium. It will squeeze to pump that blood down to the left ventricle. So let's open up the left atrium. Similar to our right atrium, okay, that branched muscle structure, to create that ringing motion and get every last drop of blood down into that ventricle with each stroke. We can follow that flow. On this cut, I'm going to make the cut all the way down to the apex. That's the point at the bottom of the heart, so we can fully open the left ventricle. You might even be able to notice as I cut this, it's a much more difficult cut than anything we've done so far. It's a lot thicker and a little harder to get through with the scissors. As I bring it all the way down to the point and open it up for you, you should be able to notice the difference between the left side and the right side. The outer wall of that left ventricle, again, we've just opened up that fist, is incredibly thick. So if you compare that outer wall of the left ventricle to the outer wall of the right ventricle that we cut through in the first place, you'll notice here we're going from a thickness of maybe about 1 centimeter to here a thickness of maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, so much thicker. Why does that left ventricle have to be so thick and strong? Because it needs to create the force, to create the pressure that'll force that blood throughout your entire body. Just remember, right side is only pumping to the lungs. That's all in the same neighborhood. Left side has to move that blood everywhere else in the body. Okay? So it's really that thickness that we have to maintain that force. We can see again another set of valves. This is your mitral valve or your bicuspid valve. One flap and the second flap, which we've had to cut through. A couple other things that jump out at you when you look at the left ventricle is you notice all these little spider web-like strands that attach to our flaps of the valve. These are called your chordae tendineae, and they're little tendons that are going to hold on to that flap of the valve. Remember, there's incredible force being created here. This is going to be one of your body's highest blood pressures at this point. And they're slamming those valve doors closed with every stroke of the heart. So these little strings need to be unbelievably strong. Even I can't rip them, they're that strong, okay, to withstand the force coming up against the bottom side of that valve every beat of the heart. With that valve door closed, the blood only has one option, is heading up this way through the aorta. And this blood will now travel off everywhere else it needs to go in the body. Okay? Now, we have to remember that the heart is a muscle. It's an organ too. Blood will come out here and head to the rest of the body, all of your other organs, all of your muscles, your kidneys, your brain. But the heart says, hey, wait a minute, I'm a muscle too. I need a little bit of blood before I send it to everybody else. And there's a special way that it does that, through its own coronary arteries. If we open up this aorta, we should be able to find the coronary arteries, which is the heart's own blood supply. So let's do that. We're going to follow with our scissors one more time, out through the aorta. I'm coming up through that, underneath that mitral valve, and out through the aorta. That's your body's biggest artery. So we can open that up. And there's two things we can see. We see another valve, another semilunar valve. That's your aortic valve. But there's something else you can notice that we did not see on the pulmonary artery are these two little holes. So there's one here and there's one here. And those are your coronary arteries. So just like you need to pump blood to your arm muscles, you need to pump blood into that heart muscle as well. And if you follow me, I can take these forceps and actually stick them into one of these holes, and let's see where they go. Okay, so if you look closely, you can now see there I am inside one of those arteries that runs down the front of the heart. This is really important to note. We talked about a little earlier how damage to arteries can cause heart disease. Damage to these coronary arteries, if these arteries narrow out, if these arteries are clogged with things, means the blood can no longer flow. So when we actually talk about a clot or a clog causing a heart attack, it's inside these arteries where those clogs happen. So you can imagine there's only two ways for blood to get to this entire organ. If this were to get clogged up here, blood can no longer flow to any parts of this left side and the front side of the heart, that muscle will die. That's a massive heart attack, okay, as that muscle dies. If it were to clog lower down here, after it started to spread to this muscle, it would cause a smaller heart attack. You're going to see smaller amount of damage and a smaller amount of death to that muscle. But really, that's what we're talking about when we talk about how severe a heart attack gets, is where in these coronary arteries blockages might happen. I'll make one more cut just so you can see how small these arteries actually are. They really have the diameter of about a juice box straw, so quite small. So when we talk about clogging these things, if we get in really close here, you'll see this is not a very big structure. They're quite narrow, and you can even see the smaller holes where these get to take blood deeper and deeper into that muscle. Okay. Any blockage anywhere along here will end up damaging some muscle. When we talk about certain heart surgeries, you might have heard of stents, which are little mesh tubes that we can stick in here to open them up. If people have had a heart attack, we can restore some of that blood flow. Also, we can talk about things like bypass surgeries you might have heard of, where maybe we would stitch an artery on above the clog and hop it around that clog, a single bypass, a double bypass, a triple bypass, to keep that blood flowing to this really, really important muscle of the heart. That pretty much takes us through the blood flow through the heart and all the different chambers and major structures that you might have seen in a heart diagram before: your valves, your atria, your ventricles, and the major blood vessels, the arteries and the veins. Thanks for joining us here in the Youth Biolab. Here at the Albertson Research Center, we're really interested in learning more about how the body works, and especially how your body changes when disease happens. Hopefully this has helped you learn a little bit more about how your own body works and think a little bit about heart disease, how we can prevent it, and how you can keep your own body healthy.
Make sure to click like and subscribe for more videos, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. To support the Youth Biolab's ongoing programming and expansion plans, please contact St. Boniface Hospital Foundation at stbhf.ca.